wanted to just welcome you and really create a space for you all. Today, we are going to have some experts who are going to go through some important steps with us. We know that this community schools, you all came here. Some of you I know joined us a few weeks ago, where we brought up with you this kind of historic investment that's going on with community schools in California, $2.8 billion, which is the biggest single investment in the history of our nation in community schools. And we went over some of the guidelines about what we expect will be in the application. And we also laid out about what a real challenge it's going to be. Community schools really are the antidote to a lot of the kind of top-down decision-making that goes on so often in education, the disconnect we have from each other, from our coworkers, the disconnect from our students. But there's a lot of historical reasons for this, right? And to really put together, while we've been waiting, people have been waiting for this opportunity for decades, for something like community schools to come along, and the gift that it has. And if you want to, by the way, last time we had a meeting, we had some great testimonials of people who are in all stages of this process around building community schools in their local and in their district. And that's a lot of the stuff is on our website, by the way, cta.org/community schools. And so today we're not going to go so much around, we're going to actually start to talk about the nuts and bolts of how we do this. What are the first steps, right? We know this money is going to be coming down in a way that's often could be almost like a shock and awe. And that often our administrators just start chasing dollars. And we don't, often we don't blame them. It's been decades of disinvestment in public education that makes that the case, right? But we know if this is a historic opportunity to get this right. And if we're going to build more democratic schools, if we're going to build schools that are fundamentally anti-racist, if we're going to build schools that are where we're connected to each other and our communities in a different way, that's going to take a lot of work. And CTA, we are 100% invested in this, and we're here to support you. Today, we have folks from NEA who are going to go over some of the nuts and bolts. First, Kyle Surratt, who's been a real leader on this nationally, has gone all over the nation and looking at the best models and around how we can uplift and we can try to get right here. It's kind of give us the context and the framing of what we're up against. And then Efrain and Kyle are going to go over some of the nuts and bolts of how districts can apply. Again, this is not unions that are applying. This is districts that are applying, which means we're going to have to really fight to be at the table. And that's really what we're going to be laying out today, is how we make this a democratic process. Then we're going to have Kyle and Brian are then going to go over some real nuts and bolts, 5 steps that you all can take around really getting prepared for this. And finally, Michael, Aisha, and Kyle are going to go over some resources, because we know that if we're going to get this right, it's a local fight, but some of what we're taking on is bigger than any one local. And that this is also a historic opportunity for us as CTA to function in a different way, to uplift and struggle and fight around models statewide, but also in every local across this state, and for models that really meet our needs as educators and needs of our students. And so we know that's a huge uplift, and we know that we're about that, and that's why we're so happy you're here. And finally, we will end up with some question and answers and some closing at the end, where we'll have some time, hopefully get some of your questions answered. I hope that's clear for you for the process. I guess we'll just get right into it. Let me go to Kyle Surratt from National Education Association to lead us off today.
Great. Thanks, David. So, really great to be on here with everyone. I'm Kyle Surratt with the National Education Association. I lead our work on community schools. We're currently working in 80-something school districts and 30 states, helping to grow the number of community schools across the country. So does anyone know how many community schools there are in the United States by any chance? I should have done my homework ahead of this, but I didn't, so I need a little help. Anyone? It's okay, you could put it in the chat box, you can unmute, but we're gonna mute you right back right after you unmute. So approximately 5,000. Yeah, that's what's out there. The community school space actually doesn't know exactly how many community schools there are, but it's between 5,000 and 10,000. Now, does anyone know how many new community schools are going to open up in California over the next 3 years? 3,000, 3 to 4,000. So California is getting to open up community schools and basically double the number of community schools we have in the whole country. It's pretty insane. That's what we're here for. Many of us nationally have been campaigning for community schools for the last 8, 10 years. There are some of you, and I can see you on the screen, that have been working for years in your local districts to help win community schools. And it was because of your efforts in various places, and you know who you are, that have fought to win community schools locally, but also made it a priority in California. So this $3 billion for community schools is, I don't think it would have happened without your efforts, your local efforts, and without CTA. So that is really big. Today, we're not going to go over what a community school is. That's something we did in a previous presentation that we were talking about before. But just know, it's the only thing we know that can sustainably transform a school and community holistically. There's a lot of great things in education, but it's the only thing that we're aware of that doesn't just select some kids and some families to succeed. It's the one that takes everyone how they are and moves them from wherever they are to where their dreams are. So the context for today is historic investment in community schools that has the ability to be a down payment to transform, the school in your district, the set of schools that has for generations or maybe ever not accomplished or put students on a path to achieving their dreams. That's what we're talking about here, is the power to transform that. I do have to tell you that the word community school can mean a lot of things. And most community schools that we're aware of don't transform much. But there are some community schools like MLK Middle School in San Francisco, whose community school coordinator is a leader in UESF, Leslie Hu, transforms things amazingly. So we know what the best community schools do, and it's just not what districts tend to do when they try to do this strategy. So the folks in LA, they'll tell you how hard it is to get a district and a community to adopt the hard version of community schools that gets you to where we want to be. That is a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of your political capital and muscle to be involved in your community school effort. So that's the context I wanted to share with you, is that many of your districts might not even want to apply. Many of your districts might not even want you to be involved in this thing. But this is one of the biggest opportunities to transform schools and communities that's existed in our lifetimes. So happy that everyone is here today. So Ephraim works for CTA, and he's been critical in helping to get this allocation into play in California, and he's been critical in helping to shape it so it's the most transformational version of itself. Are we getting exactly everything that we said we wanted? The answer is no, right? That's just not how it works. But the good stuff that's in there, you got to thank this guy, right? And it's a team effort, and he'll be the first one to tell you that. But he's going to answer a lot of the nuts and bolts of like, what is this? What's inside this $3 billion? And we're going to do a fair amount of Q&A in this section. So don't feel like you need to wait to the end for this. Like, Ephraim's going to tell you a bunch of stuff, and then we're going to do Q&A. Monica, who co-leads this work for CTA, is going to help manage the Q&A, and then we're going to go into the next section. So Ephraim, take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen really fast. And please don't mind the background. I'm not a very creative person, so my PowerPoints all have the same exact background. Some of the information here is going to look similar to what if you were on the event from the 19th. And what I was able to do was kind of take that information and then highlight what we know, what we don't know. So I'm just going to take this right here. Very first thing, just word of warning, if it's highlighted in yellow, that means that's not set in stone. That means that that's our current best guess. And I'll also give you a heads up saying, hey, we're pretty good on this. We think this is pretty firm, but it hasn't been officially stated. So very first thing, implementation and planning grants, the key dates, the RFA is targeted to be released on February 28th. Received word today that that's still the target, at least for planning implementation. The Technical Assistance Center piece will probably be later, but that doesn't really concern us right now in terms of the locals, but they are still working to hit the February 28th date to be released. Given that, the next one, the grant application due date will still likely be late March, early April, which means a 4 to 5 week turnaround, which then, to Kyle, I think David's point earlier, then tends to lead to district admin just doing this in a closet on their own, and we have to fight against that, obviously. So being prepared for it's going to be just vitally important. So it's going to be a very quick turnaround. The last point here is still set in stone. The grant awards will have to be submitted, reviewed, have an appeal, and then be acknowledged and officially awarded via state board approval at their May meeting. So we know that's the case 100%. So everything is being backed up to those dates and getting that there. So that's kind of where that is. The planning grant piece, a lot of information, this has not fundamentally changed. It's still in place. The planning grants, once again, to reiterate, are for qualifying entities via their local education agencies, which means the district, or for charters, the charter, without existing community schools. We've gotten lots of questions of, hey, can we, if we have a community school, but we really haven't really done much with it, can we get a planning grant? There is still a question out there, so I probably should highlight this piece. There is not a strict definition of what existing community school means. The only part that we know for sure is that if you have received funding in the past from the state, which means the 2020 $45 million that went out, and that only went to about 30 different places, or 20, either 20 or 30. Otherwise, it's not considered necessarily existing community school. So just keep that in mind. If you have a question about that and you have a certain scenario locally that you want to check in with us on, please send that over to us, and we can kind of help you kind of get through that. We do understand that they're going to just do $200,000 grants for the planning grants, and that's just to keep it simple. So just keep that in mind. That's for the LEA, not specifically just the individual school. It's for the entire LEA. Keep that in mind. There's still a matching of 1/3. Our understanding that the matching will be very flexible still, and there's a lot of different ways to kind of skin that to figure that out. So just keep that in mind. And then the fourth point there, which is really important, is that per the statute, the CDE must reserve implementation grant funding for 5 years for anyone who receives planning grants. So if you in your planning grant, you say that you're trying to target 3 schools and they're, X amount of size or whatever, then the CDE will have to then save money for you, assuming that with your planning grant that you hit the deliverables, meet the commitment criteria, and then move to implementation grants. They have to save that money for you in place. And then again, like I said before, the planning grant funds can be used for these different things at the bottom. To keep that in mind, a lot of good work going on there. So fundamentally, that component of it has not changed dramatically, which is good. It kind of keeps us on the straight and narrow and the path moving forward. I will say this piece has changed, and this is like fresh off the presses. I was having a discussion today where I got some of this information. So keep in mind, the yellow parts are not firm. We do know they want the forms to be simple. We do know they want a low threshold for receiving funds. We are pushing back on that to make sure that people have to make commitments to get the planning grant. Did learn today that they're hoping to plan to give people money in stages. So, you know, a front end allocation, if you do what you said you're going to do, give them a back end allocation as well, which could be 100 and 100 or whatever it may be. Keep that in mind. And more than likely, the application, this is not firm, but this is what we're hearing, will include your needs information, which will mean your LEA fills out percent unduplicated, what's your suspension rate, what's your dropout rate, all those pieces. And then they'll have a series of questions, which will have drop-down responses. I don't have much information on what the questions will be, but it'll be things like, are you ready? What's the need of your schools? What's the situation for your schools, et cetera? And then they're going to ask for a short narrative. All these things lead to the whole, it's going to be a simple process. So keep that in mind. And it makes it so the local being even more vigilant to make sure that folks are not filling this out on their own and not with our local, with the steering committee, et cetera. I see a raised hand. Do we want to do a question now or do we want to wait? It's completely up to
Why don't we, you go through your slides and everyone use the, like Ian's doing, the hand raise function, and then we'll call on you in order that we saw that, and as close to order as we could figure out. So if Ryan just kind of go through and then we'll answer the Q&A.
Cool, will do. So again, the highlighted portion, that's not set in stone yet. It's just what we're hearing. Implementation grants, some of the new info is that the lowest grant amount will be 150. Again, that's not set in stone, that's just what we're hearing, and that would be for the smallest of schools between 1 and 150 students. The largest schools, the largest comprehensive schools could be closer to the 500. The most schools will fall in the 250, 300, 350, 400 range, give or take. And we do understand that this is going to be for new community schools for petition grants, expanding and continuing, and for the 5 years. So keep that in mind. Same idea on the matching of the 1/3. It's going to be flexible. Obviously, we don't want people to mess around with that, but you know it will be flexible. So work with your district on that piece. Here are some of the band pieces. Again, the highlighted portions are not set in stone. So the very small schools, the smallest amount will be in the 150 range for schools. We're anticipating the small schools will be more in the 250 range, the 151 to 400. We expect the small, medium, large to be in the 350, 400 range, give or take, and then the large ones to be in the 500,000. One thing that seemed to be confusing for folks and kind of led to mixed messaging was when they saw up to 500,000 per school, everyone kind of assumed that meant 500,000 per school, and that wasn't the case. They wanted to have these gradations across for the number of students, but there will be a base amount and a floor. The last piece for me to kind of hit on, and then I have some other slides that I have hidden right now that I went over last time, so I wasn't too sure if we want to hit those again, but I have them prepared just in case, is that this is all for round 1 of RFAs, which will be coming out February 28th. That's the first round. There will be a second round that is more than likely going to happen in the fall, probably the late fall, October, November timeframe for the following school year. So please keep that in mind. If your LEA is not prepared, your district's not prepared to submit immediately in this 4 to 5 week turnaround, there will be another on-ramp to this work and this funding. That's the kind of the big picture for where we are. We have a ton of like FAQ type of questions that we've been banting, kind of throwing around internally and then with CDE and other folks. And there's a million different ways to kind of attack that and cut at it. But I think this is to the point, Kyle, where we can open it up for folks to ask questions.
All right. All right, Monica, over to you to kind of go there.
Great, thank you. So, we could go by order of who has raised their hand. And if you have a question, please raise your hand as well. And if you can, it would be great if you could include like your question in the chat, just so that we can kind of keep record of it. So the first person that I have with their hand up is Ian from Pomona.
Hey, how you guys doing? Thank you guys for all your work. Hi, Kyle. Good seeing you again.
Hello.
Appreciate you being here. I think that we need to apply. I was based on the meeting that last time with you, Kyle, as well, was a grant for beginning a community school. But I think that we need to apply for a grant for implementation of schools, I believe. So I think, based on what Efrain just presented, my question was a little premature and it came up before his presentation. So I think that we need an implementation grant, not a development grant. So what are your thoughts on that? How do I go about? Is there a link for that somewhere where I can do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and that Efrain, please layer in here, right? Almost everyone on this call will most likely be applying for a planning grant. And that's a really good thing in this scenario, because have we all seen districts or schools go and start a program without thinking too much ahead? And you saw what happened to those programs, right? Yeah, I think we all have seen that. So if you can get your district, and almost everyone's, it's going to be automatic to apply for a planning grant, you should do that, because it'll force them into a planning situation with you where we can support you to get everyone to adopt some of the best practices that we're aware of. So, Ian, I think that there are some unanswered questions about if you got a grant from last year or the year before, whether you qualify for a planning grant. And I think there's a good case to be made. I don't know whether it's like, we'll get it. But let's just say you're a district with like 3 or 4 community schools and you want to apply for 20 community schools, you probably have to do a fair amount of planning to go from small to that big. So, so I feel like we at our level, like the CTA folks here can like try to do some advocacy so that we can get there. But that's the fuzzy area, isn't it, Efrain, that like, we're currently dealing with.
So we should apply for a planning grant.
What I know about you guys in Pomona, you should do planning grant. And you guys aren't special. I think you guys have some remodeling to do about your community school strategy is the best way to put it. And why push yourself into a big implementation grant in the first year when you need the time to do the planning?
Okay, thanks a lot.
Efrain, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, the catch here is that the statute's really clear in terms of they want, if you have existing community schools, they want you to do a petition grant. I think the argument could be made of how we define existing, and existing meaning what. And I think that's the question here. And it's not like people will try to game the system to get to implementation right away because it's more money, but generally people won't game it to go the other way and say, hey, give me less money right now, let me plan and get prepared for more money down the road. So we'll just need to clarify that with CD in terms of how they're going to determine it. Is it from what I'm hearing, it's pretty much going to be a self-determination unless you already received money via that 2021 grant, which I have a list here. It's like 20 or 30 LEAs.
Great, thank you. So next question is from David Hernandez. David, you're on mute.
I thought you guys unmuted us. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a question in regards to the $200 initial planning grant. With that $200,000, does that include the cost of the coordinator? And if the coordinator is included in that $200,000, my question is that a certificated position or is that a management position?
Kyle, do you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, so that money can be used for a number of different things. We have pushed to say that money should be used for getting the community schools coordinator in place. I think from our perspective, we want that person to be certificated. I have seen some PowerPoints or some presentations by different county offices saying that it should be management, but I think we should be pushing back on that and saying it should be certificated for our locals. And I see Esperanza nodding her head, so that must be the right answer. Awesome.
And David, I'll just add a little bit here that in planning, you're not like trying to figure out how you're doing it at a school per se, because you might be planning for 5 schools or 7 schools. What you're thinking about is, how do we do the community school strategy in our district? How does this fit into our strategic plan? Who's supervising this work? All the there's a lot of key questions that need to be figured out before you even hire that community school coordinator. But which bargaining unit do they fit into? What do we mean by a needs and asset assessment? A lot of stuff. So you could talk to places like LA that took a whole year, a little bit more than a year, to figure out those questions, or San Diego that just spent a whole year going through that process and coming up with an implementation manual. And you save so many years in like confusion and mess up stuff if you plan for that first year ahead of time. So
if I could say something, that's really helpful, because initially in learning about the implementation is basically developing some type, I guess, task force to develop a planning grant, right? The implementation grant. So the implementation grant then would include the coordinators for those school sites that would have those community schools, correct?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So, and you want to have those people in your bargaining. There's a preference that we have for having them in a bargaining unit, right? We can protect them. We can shape things as it relates to them. Do you need to be a certificated person to be a great community school coordinator? The answer is no. But we're probably the ones that are most likely to advocate for the best practices in this community school space, given how much we've been advocating for the strategy. So there's a lot of reason to push for it to be a certificated position.
And just one more comment, I also represent classified. So in the classified unit, we have the family engagement specialist, and we also have the cost specialist, which would be very much involved in the community school program. So they are CTA members. So I guess when we're talking about who would be the coordinators, who would be the planning, I guess we're talking about people who would be our members. Right?
Yeah, that's the best way to put it, right?
Okay,
San Diego has a good example of, they actually sent out a job description where it could be a certificated or a non-certificated position. So they left it open, but both were, I think, were positions that we were comfortable with it being. Keisha, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think part of it was that we wanted someone who had education background. And so that's why the certificated position was important to us, since they would be leading the curriculum and working with the educators on the site. So yeah, we heard from LA that was best practice. So thank you to LA for that advice. So we went with that.
Great.
May I say one other thing too, Kyle?
Yeah, go for it, David.
Often, David, the issue is not even between administrator or our own members. Often what they do is they try to actually farm this out to other outside organizations. That's why we really do push on it being one of our members, is because those organizations then come in, and some of them are great organizations, but we want something that is living at the school site and is part of the conversation, part of that infrastructure at school sites, because we want to see the assets, both the needs should be driven by what the needs are at the school site, but also the assets of the community and the school site, rather than farming this out. So that's another reason why often the community school coordinator stuff doesn't become a fight between administrator or a member, it becomes a struggle between outside agencies and our own internal membership. But again, that's more the implementation. The first couple $100,000 is really about actually setting up the process to have those struggles and those fights in a democratic way and making sure we're at the table, and so is the community.
All right, back to you, Monica, for whoever is up next.
Great. So next up, I saw Francisco put something into the chat from Richmond, and then Christine from Pittsburgh also put something in the chat. So if Francisco, if you wanted to unmute yourself and just ask your question.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I was just chatting with Efrain back forth. So I was just asking whether if our district, West Contra Costa, was in the 2020 CDE list of LEAs that received the funding, and it seems like we are not. And we've had community schools within our district for quite some time. And so my question was, can we apply towards the planning grants, which I think this is still might be a little unclear, but from right now, it seems like we might be able to apply for those grants. Tentatively.
So Monica and David, I think based off the question from Francisco and then from folks in the chat, I think one thing that we need to commit to is getting back to CDE and state board and say, hey, we have to dial this in quickly in terms of what will be the line of demarcation on existing community schools, and we'll advocate for pretty much, unless you were on that list, you're considered that you haven't had them and you can get a planning grant, and then try to figure out, does that have an unintended consequence for folks who do have them, aren't on that list, and want to pursue implementation grants? So you got to kind of figure that out. So I'll push on that really hard.
Yeah, and Francisco, I think even the person who leads community schools in your district, Martine, would tell you that she would probably want a planning year to remodel how you guys do community schools. So give yourselves a year, because we recommended to those who are trying to push this really fast that we needed more time, and they wanted to get this money out the door now. And so one way for us to get more time is to push our districts into planning grant phase. It's not like we don't get the money. We get the money in the following years, but at least it lets us do some planning on the front end.
And I just to follow up on that, I see David Fisher here in Sacramento City Teachers Association. They were, by the way, on that list that you're talking about, Francisco, where they were supposedly got money. They were at negotiations about community schools partially for a number of weeks, even a couple of months, before the district themselves even realized they had gotten the grant. Right? No one at the school site even knows they had gotten the grant. So that's, again, antithetical that what we're trying to do here is why we're really trying to build this bottom up. Even places that got this grant before have been using, for the most part, a real top, not always, but almost always, a real top-down model. And we're really trying to disrupt that with this. And we feel like having us have the time to plan this, engage with our members deeply and have that power, come to the table with the power, and also engage with the community is a real game changer in how we go this. Otherwise, we know, as David Fisher can share, we know exactly how it does. It just, no one even knows, right? The money just disappears. Then we get some coordinator from an outside group that we never even heard of, right? Yeah.
Yeah, David, so that's accurate. They didn't seem to know it. And then another thing that was kind of eye-opening is when we were inquired, we of course proposed, a whole process for applying for this and having a coordinator and whatnot. And one of their bargaining team members said, "Oh no, districts can't even apply for them, only community groups." So they didn't even know, what would be the next step. So yes, it's you very much got to kind of get your arms around this.
And if you remember what we talked about earlier, that there's a lot of different types of community schools, and there is a way to make this really transformational. Think about what David Fisher just said. They have a community school in their district that people don't even know that they're in a community school. And so that could be the status quo in California if people like us don't force the collaboration and best practices that are necessary to make this thing particularly transformational. Monica, back to you. See you next.
Great. So we're kind of staying in the northern part of the state here. So we're going to go to Christine from Pittsburgh and then Daisy in Hayward.
Thank you. I'm Chris Cohen, and I'm president of the Pittsburgh Education Association in between San Francisco and Sacramento. So I've been in this district for 26 years. I've never heard of us having community schools, but newsflash, we have two. We have two, a junior high and an elementary school. Never heard of such a thing. And then with all of these emails and stuff of presentations and workshops and stuff, this is like new to me. So I did ask the superintendent, and she told me that we had two already. And from what I take, because I've been involved in the union for 15 years, that what we currently have, there's no union involvement, no union engagement, no, it's not run by the union at all and stuff. So, and the two that we had, it's through the California Department of Education. So my question is, we certainly have a lot more schools that could benefit from this. It's not like we're super high achieving over here in Pittsburgh. So can we apply to get more schools added, or the fact that we've already have two kind of closes the shop for us?
Efrain, do you want to take it?
Yeah, no, you 100% can apply for funds, for implementation grants to expand and get new schools, and also to support the continuing schools. I think one thing that got pretty messy on this is that there's different camps of people and what they mean when they say community schools. If you talk to a county office of education, they generally look at community schools as juvenile court community schools, which are the continuation schools that they have are students that are no longer in the mainstream and coming to alternative education settings and all that. So they're definitely, even within the CDE grant that we're mentioning from 2020, significant confusion, and some of the grants that went out actually went to county offices that were serving their court community schools. Now, does that mean that court community schools don't need these resources and need the supports? No, not at all. Every child needs the supports, and every educator. But when we're talking about community schools, we're talking about the pillars and the evolution of schooling to what Kyle and everyone are talking about here. So there is confusion sometimes, and I found that we kind of have to drill in with questions about what do you mean when you say that. But no matter what, there is access to funding for whether you have none, you do planning, or you have some and you want to expand or get support for those current ones that you already have up and running.
And I think we've all seen programs like restorative practices where it's like, you're calling that restorative practices? And then you go to some other place and you're like, this is restorative practices. Or like, you call that project-based learning? This is, like there's always a spectrum. And so it's not necessarily the fault of district administration taking an interpretation of this community school thing, but they've settled on something that's not very transformational in nature. So that's why we're advocating pretty strongly on the planning side, so that we could provide the education that your administration needs and your community needs about what it takes to get from wherever the type of community schools that you currently have to the type that we know are possible. Just so you know. So back to you, Monica.
Yeah, so next person up, we have Daisy from Hayward.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I joined a little late. As a ESB, my day is longer than most of yours. So I'm here looking forward to all the information that you are providing. My CTA staff, David Hernandez, is here already, and he probably has speaking to you a little bit about the setting in Hayward. I am the ESP president of my local, and CTA here. We work together. The classified and the certificated side, we work as one. We're very close. We do everything together, so we're both interested. Mercedes Farage, the president from here, couldn't come because we are doing transition meetings for a couple of schools are closing, so we're doing the transition meeting. So we had to decide which one is going to go where. So my question is, when we asked the district about the community school funding, the response from them was, well, we haven't received the application yet, has not been released. And we understand that the grant will be given in May. But we want to know, CTA knows always better than anybody else. So we want to know how true is this? Are we really we're waiting for this application because we want to be part of it. We have been picking the interest of the community members. Our union is fully interested in doing this, and so is here. So what can you tell us a little bit about that? When is the application coming out from the state?
All right, Efrain, go for it.
They are right in the sense that the application will be coming out is targeted for February 28th. I think the issue with their stance is more of they want to not get ready for the application. So I think that's where your local comes in and says, hey, let's start having these discussions, start collaborating on what we want to do. Once the RFA or the request for applications comes out, then we hit the ground running.
Okay.
So it's February 28th, right? That's we can all get started. So don't wait. And it's due when again, Efrain? Sorry.
The due date is not a firm one. We're anticipating it to be late March or early April, so a 4 to 5 week turnaround at most. I would say plan for 4-week turnaround, especially because I think that's gonna, spring breaks after that. So yeah, just plan for a 4-week turnaround just to be prepared and have all the ducks in a row.
All right, so Daisy, fact checking in real time here. We're right, they're wrong. All right, next.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, Thank you so much.
Okay, great. All right, Monica, did we get anyone from the South yet?
Well, we kicked off in the South, but
okay.
We've been up north for a while. Anyone else? I don't have anyone else on the stack. Okay, Gina.
Hi, I would like to know how competitive is this field? So if we put our application in, what is the likelihood that we're going to receive, if we meet all the criteria, that we're going to receive a grant? Are there going to be people who are left out? If so, how's that work out?
So I'll preface it by saying when the 2020 CDE grant application came out, it was for $45 million. That was oversubscribed, meaning that more people applied than they could fund. I think to the tune of, I think they ended up having like $150 million worth of applications come in. This is the opposite. This is $3 billion. There's a certain amount set aside for planning grants, a certain amount set aside for invitation grants. Our estimation is that the planning grant for this first round will not be oversubscribed. So I anticipate pretty much everyone who applies for a planning grant will be funded. I think the trick is going to be if you fund every planning grant, then you're also tying up implementation grant funds for 5 years for those folks. And that's where the trick is going to come in terms of how the CDE is going to deal with that. And they have not figured that out yet. So just be ready for that. But we anticipate that planning grants pretty much, unless there's some major issue, will be funded for better or for worse.
David Goldberg, did you want to get in here, or
yeah,
I saw you were unmuted.
I was going to say, so there's competing interests here, right? We want to uplift the best models, the models where we're actually part of it, and the community's part of it, and we're part of the democratic decision every step of the way. The state is trying to get this money out very quickly, right? Very quickly this school year because of their own timelines around budgets. So as Efrain said, likely the planning grants are going to be easier to get. What we're really going to do is really struggle and say, and we're going to say, when it comes to actually the implementation, that we want to fund the best models. We don't want to fund models like where it's more of the same stuff, where people at the school site themselves don't even know they're a community school, right? So that's where the real work comes in. That's why we're meeting here. As you've heard some of these questions, our own districts we're way ahead of the curve right here. None of the administrators are talking about this like this. None of the school board members are. We are because we have to be, because we know that if we're not at the very beginning and carving out space for us and talking to our members and building power, and then building power of the community as well, that this is going to go the same way everything else does. And so I think, so the planning grant should be easier to get money. And then the real fight is going to be after that year of planning, or sometimes you can even take up to 2 years of planning, whether we all and you and you'll be the shot callers on this, whether you want us to really fight for you all to get the money, right? And if you want to fight to get that money as well, whether it's been have you been part of those decisions, or is it just something that you've lost total control of and you don't support it because it's just a waste of time?
Yeah, Gina, I see you have a follow-up question, but
Yeah, so just for clarity, so if you get the planning grant, I can't remember his name, said that the money would be tied up for the implementation grants, but then David was saying something that sounded like that was not the case, so.
Yeah, so here's how to square those two things. All right, Efrain, did you want to?
Yeah, there's some nuance. So the way it's going to work is like, say, I'm not sure what district that you're from, but say you do the planning grant, and in your planning grant, you're saying, hey, we have 5 schools that we want to target, and they're these sizes. Once you receive the planning grant, the CDE will have to reserve enough funds for your district to do the implementation grant for those 5 years. Now, the difference to what David was saying was that they have to technically reserve that money, but what we're fighting for is to say, listen, if you want to access that money that's reserved, you better be doing this good work that we're trying to lift up. And that's kind of we're trying to raise the threshold to say, hey, CDE, we know you have political needs to get this money out, which we don't necessarily like, because it could lead to some folks going out there and getting funds that really don't deserve it, or aren't truly thinking about the transformative model community schools. But if that has to happen, raise the threshold so that if folks are then transitioning from planning to implementation, they have to prove that they've hit these different commitments and prove that they're doing this work well to actually then access that reserved funding for them of implementation grants. So it's very nuanced, but that's kind of where we are.
So everyone, in general, if you have a pet and they want to fill out this application, they'll probably get granted. It's like a real low bar, and we had a problem with that, but that's actually the way it's going to go. We're going to try to use some political power to make it so these pet applications don't go through, but we don't want community-less community schools. Is it Wendy? And then we have to move on to the next section, I think.
Yeah, but before we go to Wendy, someone DM'd me a question that I wanted to just share so that I could answer and send a resource. So someone asked if there were buzzwords that we need to use in the grant. I totally get where you're coming from there. I would say that in the January State Board of Education meeting, they approved the community schools framework, which is kind of like the guiding principles of this program. And so no buzzwords, but this long document that outlines, the kind of model that the state would like us to be following. So I just put that in the chat. And then now Wendy.
Hi, my apologies. I think I came in a little bit crazy, and I I heard David call my name. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? My apologies for that. And I asked a lot of questions, Monica and David. I know I've asked you several already. So again, what do we need to make sure that we've got in place with our districts to in preparation for applying for the grant? I heard steering committee. I know that the bar is really low, but what are like the minimum? I mean, I saw the things that Efrain shared on the, but what are like the things that we need to make sure, like steps we have in place? I mean, I know besides obviously working with your district and obviously building capacity within your association, I know those aren't things that are required to do, but I'm just sort of like, so that I can walk in with my district and say, because we're totally on board, the association's on board, we've passed our association resolution, done all of that, but I want to be able to walk in and say, these are the things that I expect that we are doing as we apply for the grant.
Wendy and I worked on this segue ahead of time. So Wendy, I'm glad you played your role very well there.
Glad I could.
Yep. Brian is gonna jump right into that answers to that question. And then we'll have some Q&A at the back end of this meeting if we want to keep on here. So go for it, Brian.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Wendy. Yeah, that was perfect. My name is Brian Guerrero. I am CTA Instruction and Professional Development Department staff. And I'm going to share my screen with you all. So what you are seeing now is a tool that is 99% finished, and we'll be sending it out to you in the next couple of days. We talked about exactly what Wendy was asking about. What can chapters do to prepare for this process? And, you know, CTA and NEA have been working together with some chapters for several years on this, and we're developing kind of a long-term plan. You know, how do you get ready for community schools? What do you do? And then the state of California introduced these grants, and it pushed the timeline up much more quickly. And so one of the things that we've talked about is there are, in some cases, an ideal process that you would go through if you had a couple of years to plan this out. But there's also the quick process for those of you who are going to be working with your districts or pressuring your districts to apply for this first round of grants. So we came up with 5 steps. What this tool does is it identifies kind of each step. It also identifies some concrete things that you can try to achieve at each point and concrete things that you can do at each point to get yourself ready. And then following this, there's a much more detailed section where we talk about specific who should do what, when should you do that, what should your concrete achievements be. And then there's a number of links to different resources that go along with it. So I'm not going to go over all of those, but I do want to take just a quick opportunity here to show you a little bit about it. So 5 steps to community schools. The first one, particularly on the fast track, is building that support among your chapter leadership. It's not enough for just the president to be excited by this. It's a process of educating the whole leadership about the benefits of community schools, some of the challenges and the things that are going to need to be done. There's definitely work and commitment involved with this, but doing that education piece and getting some type of a executive board resolution, something that commits the chapter to that. The ultimate goal, let me go back one step. The ultimate goal here is to get some type of agreement with the district to negotiate something like an MOU that really lays out the specifics of who is going to be part of whatever the steering committee is for your community school. How is that community school going to operate? How are the members of the steering committee going to be chosen, and what are their authorities going to be? But to get to that, you need to build towards it. So building support among your leadership, building support among your membership. In a perfect world, this would really be the first step, and the idea of community schools would kind of rise up from the membership. We don't necessarily have time to do that first right now, but it's something that you have to be doing hand in hand with building the support of your leadership, and that's educating your membership on the benefits and the ways that community schools can benefit students and other educators, other folks on campus. Maybe you want to do a rep council resolution or something like that to show that membership support. Building community support. You can't have community schools without the community involved. And so connecting with parents, connecting with community groups, connecting with families and caregivers, and connecting with those types of folks. This could culminate here. It could be in the next step, but that might build towards some kind of presentation to the school board. The school board may or may not be informed on community schools, but it might be something where the school board hears from the community and hears from the membership and hears from the leadership of your chapter saying, we want community schools. This is how it's going to benefit our students. This is how it's going to benefit the parents and families. And maybe the school board passes some type of a resolution in support of community schools. Again, we have some links down below that talk about what that resolution might include. We've got some examples of school board resolutions in support of community schools. That's not enough because, as Kyle and Ephraim mentioned a couple of times, step 4, that district has to be the one to apply for this grant. No matter how good our intentions are, no matter how much the community wants it, no matter how much the chapters and associations want it, the district has to be the one to apply for this. So using the support of the community, using the support of the membership, hopefully districts will be excited by this. Hopefully districts will see the opportunity and will be interested in applying. But in case you've got to do some convincing, that's kind of the next step in this process. And we've got some examples of resources you can use there. And then ultimately what you get to is this building structures for the shared decision making. That's really negotiating that you want formal language. So we use an MOU as an example here. This shouldn't just be kind of a verbal agreement or some type of promise that that's how they're going to do it. You really want some type of MOU, or contract language that specifies how these community schools are going to be run, because that's what's going to ultimately hold the districts accountable. It would be great if you could go into the planning phase with this MOU negotiated. But one of the things, again, with this really short timeline, one of the things that we've all kind of recognized is that you may have to go into planning with a looser agreement with the district, some kind of acknowledgement that, yes, it's going to be a transparent process. Yes, it's going to be an open and inclusive process, and use that planning time as you're figuring out what are the roles of community liaisons or other staff that are associated with the program, and use that time to also be doing some negotiating with the district about what the ultimate kind of contractual structure, that what the obligations they're going to have and the rights and responsibilities of the different stakeholders and community partners. This may look like a very familiar process to many of you. Ultimately, it's organizing. It's organizing your members and getting your members behind this and getting your members excited about this so they'll support the process. It's getting your community behind this and getting your community excited about this so they'll support it, and working with the district. Again, in an ideal situation, that's going to be an amicable, collaborative situation where the district and your chapter are working together to build a great program, a great community schools model. But it could also come to, because some of it is shared governance, and a lot of districts aren't used to that. They're not used to having parents on an equal footing with district administrators. They're not used to having educators on an equal footing with district administrators. So there might be some resistance to that. And that's where you use all of your experience organizing, all of your experience getting your membership motivated behind something. And ultimately, the sign of what's going to carry you forward is going to be having some type of negotiated language that really sets that into stone. So those are our 5 steps. It's really general. Kyle?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we're almost at time for this section, but we have like, I think maybe a couple questions, but I just wanted to like summarize very quickly. You don't have enough time to negotiate with your district and do all this stuff, most likely, right? So get your district to apply, or else this whole meeting doesn't even, it's not like it's a waste of time because we covered a lot of great stuff. But in order for this to matter, your district needs to apply. And there's another date, Efrain told us, right, later on to apply. So that's the big thing, is get your district to apply. And then you can work on everything that Brian talked about, right? Every CTA 5-step. So Monica, were you keeping track of like who?
Yep. So I have, so one quick question, one easy one that Joe asked is from New Haven, is, are there any samples of MOU language? Yes, we have that. It's on our webpage. I'll drop it into the link. It's definitely a part of this like 5-step. Shout out to everyone who worked on that and shared their MOU language and let us make it into templates. And then on the stack, I have Grant from Anaheim Secondary, and then Karen left a comment in the chat as well, but I don't think that's a question. So I think Grant is the next one.
So just real quick, I just wanted to comment on mapping out the organizing that we have found over the last year. There's nothing more important than the education piece, that all of the different education partners, parents, students, teachers, the community groups, that people understand what it is that you're trying to build so that you can create those structures. So you'll find every step of the process and look for different ways to provide information, whether it's parent meetings, presenting with your association time at a school board meeting, getting your superintendent to let you present at a principal's meeting. There are all kinds of ways you can get out there and get the information to them. And then also look for ways. We had a really good fortune with creating the school board resolution. The school board really wants these grants. And in the resolution, we tucked in language about supporting community schools with a model that contains a steering committee made up of people from each of the 5 groups, and then site committees that have people from each of those 5 groups in a shared leadership model. And getting that on paper from the school board then makes it a lot easier to go to the district and create MOU language.
Grants the man. All right, everyone.
All right. So next I have Karen, who does have a question, and then Claudia from Santa Monica.
So our district apparently has applied for one of the past community schools, and we have one elementary school that's a community school. The district is telling me that they're having difficulty with the compliance requirements of that for that community school, with a 0.6 coordinator working on that part-time. She's for compliance, and then the principal working on it. And they're reluctant to move forward with these new community school grants that are coming, even though we have many students and several school sites that are really ripe for this community schools. So I'm wondering if there's any kind of assistance that SLEA could get to potentially help us persuade the district to, because of the model that we're being presented with here, where there's all of this partnering with everyone who's a part of leading and maintaining that. That's my question. I'm not sure it was a full question.
Brian, do you want me to take that, or do you want to take it?
Yeah, I honestly don't know what the compliance side what it is. So if you've got some insight into that.
Yeah, I think that's a bit made up, Karen, on your district side of things. The best thing to have is a full-time community school coordinator. We haven't been able, like the coordinators that we have that are full-time, they still don't have enough time to do all their work. So a 0.61 doesn't make any sense to, and I've never seen it. Like, I've seen a lot of districts try to like put one coordinator with like 3 or 4 schools, because they're like, now we have 5 community schools, right? Or 3 or 4 community schools. That doesn't work, right? Everyone try to give you like 4 jobs to do. You know how you did that work, right? Your question, Karen, I think we're gonna have to dig a little bit deeper into that. And our next section with Michael and Aisha is gonna really talk about how we're gonna triage support for you. So as these things come up, you know exactly who you can call. We'll get you the support you need so that we can get you rolling. So Monica, I think we can move on to the next one, but Karen, just know that like there's gonna be a system to support you and others that have similar questions.
Yes, thank you. So next I have Claudia from Santa Monica.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking my question. So I recently found out that my high school is a community school, and we do have a position from LACO at our school, who I am assuming is that coordinator, but there isn't a lot of exchange with teachers. It tends to be more mental health care for students, and that seems to be their focus. And I'm interested in the idea of this collaborative leadership and practices, because some of our teachers are interested in detracking some of the classes. And I think this funding would be useful to be able to support that effort of detracking. So I guess I'm asking, how can I find out more about how those funds are being used? And can they be used for something like detracking?
That's a good question. So you can see a theme that's been popping up among folks who have community schools, don't we? Right? Like, we're in schools that are called community schools. Like, so let's just call these like community list schools, right? Like, where they're really just focusing in on maybe some form of wraparound supports. And so you guys are all familiar with Linda Darling Hammond. She's the president and CEO of the Learning Policy Institute. Her Learning Policy Institute analyzed over 150 studies across the country and tried to figure out, what do the best community schools do? And they found that there are at least 4 pillars. In NEA, we have 6 pillars of community schools. And Claudia, what you're talking about is 1 pillar, and it's probably half a pillar, right? As it relates to the coordination of services. So that's, no one deeply engaged your union or parents or students or the community on how they wanted to develop that community school or how to do it in their district. So that's why Brian's CTA 5 steps is really important, because they're not being mean or like malevolent when they do this. They're just doing what they do. And so we have to force them into these labor management community collaborations so that we can teach them what they don't know. And so we can create the type of community schools that, yes, it's harder, but definitely way more transformative. So I think this falls into a similar bucket as Karen's, that under our next section, you're going to learn like who you can call. And so we can really develop a real good game plan for you so that we can support you and your district to get on the path to what we know are best practices. So I'm cognizant of time here, Monica, but I also want to make sure folks, like the whole point of this is to answer questions, right? So happy to do that.
Yeah, I think that was the last one on our stack for this section.
All right, cool. So that's a great segue to 2 really awesome folks, Michael and Aisha. And they're going to talk to you about what type of supports you can have coming out of this call. So like, we're not going anywhere, guys. Like, we're here to support you every step of the way, not only in applying for these grants, but once we start implementing these grants, I mean, like, you know, the community schools and well beyond that. So we're here with you, but this is where we start our journey with you. So Michael and Aisha, go for it.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to see so many folks here today. I really got to commend you. You've taken the first big step in getting this work started. But, you know, it's not going to all be easy also. You know, Brian just went over that 5-step, which I love because it speaks right to my linear way of thinking. But each one of those steps, right, you might encounter a battle, getting your folks in line, getting the district in line. So before we want to talk about resources and who to go to, we wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the obstacles that you might encounter and how to inoculate those. So Aisha, what's the first obstacle that comes to mind for you that these folks might encounter?
Well, maybe it's not an obstacle. It's, look, if you guys are in a district that gets new money, every time they get new money or, you know, COLA comes through, they call you up and they're like, hey, we got new money. We want you to have some of it. Come and talk to us. Then you could kind of tune out for like the next 5 minutes, because go do it. Get them to apply for the grant and you guys are already winning. But what we are learning as we've been talking to educators and we've been working in a coach capacity, but also just as strategic thought partners with chapters who are getting themselves, who are committed to the vision that community schools can help get them to. We've been learning about some of the pushback or some of the challenges in that. So one, we want folks to just kind of recognize at a external level or the macro level. You may, you know, some districts are going to be, you know, straight with you, like, hey, we have a shared vision for students and we think we can, you know, stop the over testing of our students. We think we could have better class sizes. We think we could deal with, you know, have more positive behavior supports and discipline at our school. We think community school strategy is going to be a great way to do that because all of our partners are involved and we want to do that with you. And they're going to come to you as an equal partner with those shared interests. And they're going to say that. Some of you are going to have are going to go to your district and say, you know, as a union, we have this vision for our students to thrive in every day, have every opportunity. And we believe you do too. We think community school strategy is a way to go there. And they're going to say, no, thanks. you're going to say the sky is blue too, and they're going to say no, it isn't. You're going to have to fight, and you're going to have to get yourself in a position with the structures and systems that you'll need in place to do that. UTLA is an example. They went on strike for community schools. So that's also a potential of, whom you may be dealing with. You might also have some districts that are really authentically heartfelt, want to do this, have the shared interest with the union. You guys have a good working relationship, and they're going to say, we're good. We don't need to do an MOU though. We don't need to codify a steering committee or, any of that stuff. Just trust us, and we know that doesn't work either. So if you think you might be in that boat, just know that we're here to support you. And then there are some who are gonna just authentically want to work with you, and they have no idea because how many of you guys have school boards who have better ideas about how to teach kids than we do, right? So they're gonna have no idea or clue. And we are going to either allow them to lead that process, or we are going to fight to make sure we have a seat at the table so that we are actually leading that process, not leading it, co-leading that process, because we as experts know what our students need, what we have the connection relationship with our parents. We can talk and find out what they think that we need, what the barriers and that sort of thing is. And that's sort of a macro view of some of the obstacles you could anticipate in some of the different scenarios that we're learning from our colleagues. And Michael's going to talk a bit more about some of the internal pushbacks or challenges that other members have experienced or shared with us.
Right. I'm thinking about, as you go to your members, you go to your folks and say, hey, we want to start this community schools. Probably the number one thing they're going to say is like, we don't have the capacity for one more thing, right? We are burnt out on COVID MOUs and just fighting for our safety. And we get that and we hear you. I want to give one example of what one of our chapters who's already working on Community Schools Institute did over the last year in regards to COVID safety. They were sharing on their social media on Facebook about some of the struggles they were having, and they actually had a parent group pick up the fight and head to the school board and also push back on masking protocols and the physical distancing. So the point I make there is really not wanting you to see community schools as an additional thing on your plate, but finding ways to use the community schools fight into some of the organizing that you're already doing in your local chapter. Things like other things that contribute to burnout, like class size, workload, testing. You can use the community schools process to have collaborative leadership and try to make some of those things go away that make your lives a little bit easier in your workspaces. Another thing that I've heard from some folks is that we see this for urban chapters, but how does this really apply to rural chapters? I just don't agree with that. Number one, I taught in Kern County in a very rural district. I was there for many years, and those parents have the same concerns for their students, just like urban parents do. I had colleagues who were in that district for so many years that they had taught the parents, and now we're teaching their those parents' students, and so they have ties to the community. As I was there, we saw members come on or teachers come on who were raised in that community, and so they obviously have deep ties to the community. So I just don't understand the argument that community schools is not for rural, because we all have the same concerns, and we can go to those parents and those community groups and find out what their needs are for our districts. But the other point we really want to make, and what Kyle was talking about, is that you're not here. You're not on this alone. This webinar itself was brought to you today by just about every single department in CTA, leaders and staff working together. You have a whole slew of resources at your fingertips. We want to encourage you to work directly with your primary contact staff, but also, as a resource, you have those of us who are working on this project in, like I said, every department. Aisha is supporting chapters in this fight in Region 3. I work with chapters in Region 2. Our colleagues in the Center for Organizing and Bargaining, David and Memo, they work with chapters in Region 1 and Region 4. Again, we encourage you to go to your primary contact staff, and they will reach out to us, and we will be there to support you every step along the way.
Yeah, so exactly. So with the, some of the scenarios we put forth, you have a district who's just wants to do it, but completely confused, we can help you do a presentation with the district, right? We can help you. You've got an executive board who's like, one more thing, why are we doing this? That you need help with talking and helping them understand, educating them. We are here to support you with doing that. Our department, we're committed to working with collaborating with the field staff, with the PCS in this effort. So that's where you would start with reaching out to your PCS, and they'll contact us, and we'll set up a intake meeting immediately, get a scene and get a sense of the context, and begin strategically partnering and thinking about like what are the immediate priorities and steps that we would need to take. If you have your district that's already on board and you guys have a IBB process and things like that, it means that we can move this along quicker, sooner. If you are having to mobilize your members or organize them, like we've got an entire institute that is supporting chapters who wanted to be in a position to be able to fight for these funds. And so they have been investing that time in building, teams at their site, making sure they have a leader, a rep at every school. So it just depends on where you all are. We will help you like assess where you are, where you need to be in order to win like the vision that we have for our students. And in the end of it all, it's important for us to just tap into our why, right? Why did we come into this profession? What drove me to become a teacher was that I did believe every child should have every chance every day. And when the going gets tough, you're going to need to lean on your vision and your why for what you believe is possible for students, because this strategy is a transformational strategy when those pillars are applied. And we have an opportunity to use our own agency and our own power, as individuals, but also as a union, to create the conditions that we know our students will thrive with in a way, in collaboration with community partners that are reciprocal and longstanding. So it's an awesome opportunity, and we look forward to working with you all and supporting you in any way possible to make this happen, because we want what's best for our students all the time.
Great. Thank you, Michael and Aisha. So you're going to be getting an email after this with like who you contact, the MOU language, like the CTA 5 steps, a recording of this video, kind of like all the things you need to know, just so you have it. I put in the chat box, like if anyone wants to geek out on all things community schools, including videos and like one-pagers, there's the NEA website. CTA has a website on community schools. That's probably been dropped into the chat box. So hopefully we have that. So I think what we're going to do right now is like a couple more Q&As, and then we're going to kick it over to David Goldberg to close this out. So Monica, I don't know if you've been tracking that, but yeah.
Yep. So a question that we got was from Heidi, and I responded, but if you wanted to go off mute and ask that question as well.
I accidentally several years ago visited a community school that wasn't an official community school, and it was phenomenal. And I came back and I was telling everybody about all these wonderful programs that were happening at this school. And it was really, when I then heard about community schools later, I was like, oh, that was that school. And they were high performing in a very low income area. And I know that it really sparked interest in my mind. And I was hoping that there were some videos of places like that that we could share with our membership and with our districts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's some videos, Heidi, on the NEA website. You can kind of like scroll through and see them. And if those aren't good, like we have a bit of a repository of like other videos out there that we can send out with that email that I was talking about. So NEA, like we kind of stumbled into leadership in the community school space, and we realized there's a lot of things that the community school space had not done, including like tracking best practices, like promotional materials, all this stuff. So we've been busy working with our partners at the Coalition for Community Schools and other key players to beef up some of the things so that we have them ready so that folks can explain. So good question.
Also, I know our friends from UCLA Center for Community Schooling is on here. So I wanted to just give them a shout out and also drop their website too, which has a ton of really great resources that are really aligned with the kind of model that we know will really uplift and change our schools for our kiddos and members.
Who is it, Marissa or Karen? Who's on here from UCLA? Marissa. Hey, Marissa. All right. Any other questions that you guys have before we close this out? All right, we are not far away from you guys. That's the take-home message. And you'll get a great email from us. So, David, do you want to close this out?
Sure. And I'll just, yes. So I really want to appreciate everyone from being here. And I think just to follow up on that last question, I think that's what's motivating us all. Some experiences we've had where we've felt totally connected with our students, right? What a gift we have so often to be able to do that. And yet, there's so many things that get in the way for us doing that on an institution-wide level. And that's really what we want to recapture. So I think, as Kyle said, there's some videos that are being developed that show that. And we've also, I think, got some other videos that you may find just as meaningful, because we also know that sometimes when we see these videos, that people say that could never happen here, right? That's so disconnected from my reality. But we've been working with a group of like 20 locals in CTA for about a year who started off this process just like you are. I've spent the last year, and I see many of them on this call today, on this Zoom today, and are going through the process. And it's ugly and it's hard and it takes a lot of work, and it's also beautiful, right? So it's embracing both of those things. The beautiful struggle ahead around all this. And I guess what we're also redoing, and you all by being here, is really allowing us to refocus ourselves as an organization. Really core things that's a gift you all are giving us, our organization today. So as Kyle said, and as Monica said, and everyone else has said, we look forward to being on this journey with you. We need you. You need us. There's roles we all can play. There's partners like here, like at UCLA, as Monica said, there's going to be partners with us in the struggle. And we really appreciate you for taking this next step today.